the Federal Bar Association for the Northern District of California. It's a pleasure to welcome you here tonight to celebrate the release of Judge Alsup's new book, The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. Many of you know Judge Alsup from his beautiful pictures that grace our attorney conference rooms in our three different courthouses. But Judge Alsup is a Sierra historian, an enthusiastic mountaineer and backpacker, and an accomplished and prolific writer. Today, we will hear him in conversation with Professor Rory Little discuss how he came about writing this book. We're pleased to have Professor Little join us today. He's on a sabbatical currently at Amherst, but he graciously agreed to come back for this. Rory has been a professor at the University of California, Hastings College of Law for almost 30 years. Some of you may remember him when he was an assistant United States attorney here in this district. And some of you, or many of you, may know him from hearing him on KCBS radio, where he regularly discusses cases of import from the Cal Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court. Before we start, I would like to welcome all members of the Federal Bar Association and encourage those of you who are not members to please join. The Federal Bar Association was started in 1920 to serve the interests of the court, to help the judiciary, the federal practitioner, both private and public, as well as the public. Regularly, our chapter puts on programs that are of interest to the bar and the bench. Of note, I'd like to tell you about a program on November 10th, which will be a webinar that we're co-sponsoring the San Diego chapter. Judge Anthony Battaglia is going to be speaking about Rule 16, changing tide in expert witness procedures in criminal cases. And then on November 16th, here in this courtroom, from 2 to 5 p.m., we will have the Class Action Symposium with Judges Donato, who is present here today, Judge Tiger, Judge Kim, and select individuals from our federal bar, including Elizabeth Cabraser, who is present tonight. So I encourage you to go to those two programs. I also encourage those of you who are law students to please join the FBA. You are included. We have a special division for law students. Today, this program will be recorded and posted on the website for the Northern District of California Historical Society, as well as for the Federal Bar Association. For those of you who have not yet signed up for MCLE, please do so outside, and you will receive your certificate in a few days. I hope that all of you will join us and stay for the reception that will follow and get an inscribed copy of the book from Judge Alsup. I'd like to now turn the program over briefly to Kathleen Winters, who is the Executive Director of the Northern District Historical Society. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. I'm Kathleen Winters. I'm the Executive Director for the Northern District Historical Society. A warm welcome to all of you joining us here today. Just a couple of reminders. Do sign the CLE sheet that Randy mentioned if you want CLE credit. And also, please remember to silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. Before I turn things over to Judge Alsup and Professor Little, I would like to say a few words of appreciation to the others who have made this evening possible. Kathy Young, the judicial assistant to Judge Alsup, who I know many of you know, Rowena Espinoza, the judicial assistant to Chief Judge Seaborg, the amazing 450 Golden Gate billing staff, especially Stephen Curl, who helped with all the audiovisual work here, and also our assistants, Alexander Murray and Valerie Stewart, who some of you met on the way in. We were also fortunate enough to have several volunteers from the judges' chambers and also from local law schools. So we're grateful for their help, and please, if you get a chance, give them a good thanks on your way out. We hope you enjoy the evening. Please check your email in the coming days for information about upcoming events with both our society and the FBA, also about opportunities to join our email list, also to become members, which is how we get these great programs going, and also just to be involved in what's going on now that we are all in a position to start doing things in person again. I think there's going to be a lot of interest and a lot of really pretty amazing things in the pipeline. And I know Randy mentioned some of what the FBA has coming up. We have a program on American Indians and California's history with respect to the local indigenous populations that's set for December 1st. We're going to have a program on the 1945 UN conference and how that affects the way that war crimes are defined today, and that will be in February. So if you are a member or you're on our email list, you will get notified about those. It's now my great pleasure to hand things over to the Northern District's own Judge William Alsup and UC Hastings Professor Rory K. Little. Welcome.
Judge Alsup kindly asked me to say a few words, but I'm not going to speak as long as he had asked me to speak, because you all are here to hear him and not me. But here's what I have prepared. And this is my sabbatical haircut, by the way. I'll be teaching in January and probably get a haircut. It is rare for a judge to write and publish a book. Even more rare is a book that is not a book, a legal guidance book or a horn book. And most rare of all is for a sitting judge to write and publish a book that is a good book. Long ago, a sitting state Supreme Court judge published a pretty good book entitled Anatomy of a Murder. Maybe you've heard of it. Like this book, Anatomy was based on a real Southern murder, based on a lot of facts, embellished with creative imagination. But that book was written before the author was a judge, unlike this one. And it's difficult to imagine an equal successor in the intervening 65 years. And you all, if you didn't already get a copy, I think you will get one. And I'm urging you to read it. I'll tell you a little more about the cover in a second. Bill Alsup, who I still think of as Judge William H. Alsup. The title is intimidating to me as well as an honorific. He is such a rare judge. Even more rare than the author who published Anatomy of a Murder. While sitting for only 2 years, that judge, Judge Alsup, has been a prolific jurist for well over a decade, handling, as you must know, some remarkably well-known and high-profile cases. Second, he did write this book while he was handling a full load as a U.S. District Court judge. And he has written a good book. I'm honored to be able to speak to him and to you on this rare occasion to both honor Judge Alsup and to inquire a little bit about his book, The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald is in the genre of what we call creative alternative history, right? It's a history book based on facts, and I'll say a little bit more about that, but it's creative. It's got a whole creative thing because, of course, there was no trial of Lee Harvey Oswald because Jack Ruby shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald on national TV 2 days after Oswald shot President Kennedy. And the emotional impact of those events is hard, I think, for most people to imagine unless they live through them, and we'll hear a little bit more about that from the judge. I also want to thank Randy Sue Pollock and the Historical Association. I see Robin Lipsky as well for the Ninth Circuit Historical Association. Those groups only survive on the dues of their members, really, and I think they're worth both joining and supporting. Let's see. I'm going to say something short, or as short as a law professor can. I probably won't say everything or even anything that Bill Alsup would like me to say. I'm offering not a critique, but just a brief taste about the book. And for fair warning, there will be some spoilers possibly in our discussion. So if you want to read the book and find out what happens, you listen further at your own risk. It's been 65 years since Anatomy of the Murder was published. I'm going to leave it to you whether his book is as good as Anatomy of the Murder. I think Anatomy of the Murder is one of the greatest books ever written. The movie version of Anatomy of a Murder, as you probably know, starred Jimmy Stewart by director Otto Preminger and musical director Duke Ellington. And that underlies our cultural understanding of the book. And as I understand it, the motion picture rights for this book are pending. And I think it's fun to imagine who may portray the figures in this book. Maybe Bruno Mars for the music, and Bill Alsup would be played by who? Tom Hanks? Make your choices at the reception. the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald is about a real case, or about a case that would have been real. It would have been the trial of the century hadn't Jack Ruby not murdered Oswald 2 days after Kennedy was shot. I'm going to make the assumption, at least, that everyone in the crowd has some historical knowledge and appreciation of those events in 1963. I think the judge may say a little bit more about that. But if you don't have much knowledge of it, this book will be a good read for you. It's actually a quick and engaging read. It's not a laborious law review article, but it's also meticulously laden with facts from the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission report. I think this is maybe not all the volumes, but he's read every volume, I can assure you. And much of it is imagined in its impact on the case that would have been tried. It's called Faction, not Fiction. It's a trial lawyer's book. So Bill also was a trial lawyer before he was a federal district judge. But you don't have to be a trial lawyer to enjoy it. On the other hand, if you are a trial lawyer, I think you're going to love it. It's written from the omniscient narrative perspective, which means to say you're going to hear what figures are thinking all through the book on different sides: defense attorneys, prosecutors, reporters, investigative agents, and witnesses. So it's give you a full picture of the scope of the evidence, I think, in the case. It is an evidentiary cliffhanger, which is to say you don't know what's going to happen until you get to the last page, frankly. At the same time, it does explain some complicated legal jargon like the Brady Doctrine and how to think about evidentiary decisions and strategy up and down, and even how judges think. And here you can answer for yourselves, how much of the book should we attribute to Bill Alsop as a judge? He gives some pointers on what judges think. The book jacket, right, if you haven't looked at it, is, I think, pretty surprising when you think about it, because it says here at the bottom, a novel by William Alsop. It doesn't say Judge Alsop or the Honorable William Alsop, and it says it's a novel. And there, maybe you'll have more to say about that. The choice of calling this a novel versus other things, it certainly is a creative enterprise, but the idea that he's not trading on his position to sell this book, that he's asking you to judge it on its own merits, I think is clear from the cover of the book. What else do I have to say? You will have to read the book to find out how it comes out, but he's not a strategic slouch. He will lay bare for you many of the difficult choices that lawyers on all sides have to face. He even comes up with a plausible defense for Lee Harvey Oswald that is actually based on real evidence that he has garnered from the record. There are some moments of humor, and for the cinematic version, there's even possible romance involving not one but two gorgeous women. But he's not a romance writer, so he doesn't try to be. He describes the patrons of a strip club. There's a strip club. Jack Ruby really did own a strip club. Here are the patrons as they're described. They come in with the 10 Commandments and a $10 bill, and they don't break either one of them. James Thurber.
Wait. That was about Baptists.
Well, I didn't want to bring the religion.
They're talking about Baptists. And Jack Ruby says, yeah, they come in with the 10 Commandments and a $10 bill, and they don't break any of them.
There you go. That's just one example. James Thurber, who was a humorist a long time ago, and if you don't know who he is, you should look him up, wrote a short story once entitled, "What If Grant Had Been Drinking at Appomattox?" That's imagined creative alternative history. This is also imaginative creative alternative history. It's not as humorous as James Thurber, but it is more satisfying. Here's a plug for my hometown. Like the Philadelphia Phillies, this book has a little bit of everything. It's a championship book. We'll see. It's got religion, patriotic humor, patriotic honor for the greatest generation of World War II, a discussion of junk science, a discussion of racism and racism in the South during a trial, and even a little bit of philosophy thrown in, almost as an aside at times, like I think this was a mic drop when he has a character say, "Life is a perfect invention." I don't know whether you can attribute that to the author or not. It's a great line. There's a wonderful presentation, this is the last thing I really want to say, about an imagined conversation with Percy Foreman. Percy Foreman is the defense attorney. Percy Foreman was a real defense attorney who represented James Earl Ray He did not represent Lee Harvey Oswald. Nobody did, but he said he would have. And he has Percy Foreman deliver a soliloquy about the duty and honor of being a defense attorney and defending people who are apparently guilty. Foreman explains, and this is not until you get to page 275, so you got to read there. He says, quote, "We aren't the ones who will go to the death chamber. He is the one. He has the right, if he wants, to tell his story to the jury." And you'll have to see whether Oswald actually tells his story to the jury or not. I think it may be a fault of literary critique to try to attribute things to the author. It's fiction. So you'll have to see what you can attribute to Judge Alsop himself. But students of Judge Alsop, are there any trial lawyers for PG&E in the audience, might want to study up on this book. Whatever you think about that, you will probably like the man that it reveals. And now I'm going to turn it over to Judge Alsop. I can start with a question if you like, but it's what we call a softball, which is, how did you come to write this book of the many things you might have written about? And how did it take 8 to 10 years to get it written, published, and out on the street?
Thank you all for coming out and supporting this project. I very much appreciate it. Let me turn right to the question, which was, how did I come to do this project? In 2013, it was the 50th anniversary of 1963 and the Kennedy assassination. And one of the things I thought I would study that year was the Kennedy assassination, which I had not ever been a student of. So I got the Warren Commission report and read it, and it referred to 26 volumes of testimony that the commission had gathered. The testimony was Q&A, but it was also exhibits, photographs, for example. And I asked the library here could you get me those 26 volumes? They said, well, it might take 3 or 4 weeks, but we could probably find a set. And I said, great. Well, that very afternoon, they came up with this very cart with 26 volumes on it. And they had an embarrassed look, and they said, we're so embarrassed. We've had these in our library all these years, and you're the first one to ever ask for them. Now, I had so much fun filling out that little card in the back for each one, and I'm the first one and only one to ever check these out. I still have them in my chambers. Well, I read 24 of the 26, approximately. There are parts that I skipped over but I read, and I was, as a trial lawyer and now a judge, I have spent a career evaluating evidence. And I was totally absorbed in these people from all walks of life, a cab driver, a waitress on her way to work, a second cab driver, several police officers, quite a number of different people who were there in Dallas that day. And I began to see, about halfway through, I began to see a possible defense for Oswald. Now, I want to say this. In my opinion, Oswald was totally guilty, and the Warren Commission did a very good job. I am not a conspiracy type person. But as a good lawyer, I was a good lawyer, I could see a defense. And it got better as I kept reading. And I said, maybe there's a story here. So that's the beginning of the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, I'll need to back up, though, because I believe there are probably some people here who don't know the basics. Give me 1 minute to tell you the basics. Can I take that off? Yes. I'm going to use this map, this drawing. This is Dallas, Texas. This is Dealey Plaza. President Kennedy and his motorcade came down Main Street. It was a tremendous outpouring of public support in a city they thought hated Kennedy. and they almost took it off the list of places he would visit because they were so afraid that he would be booed out of town. But it was the exact opposite. The people of Dallas poured into the streets. This is Main Street here. The motorcade came from Love Field, came down, confetti, banners, turned right onto Houston for 2 blocks, and then turned left to make this final drive down Elm Street, and the motorcade would be over and he was going to go to lunch at a big trade mart. Unfortunately, at this window was Lee Harvey Oswald with a rifle, and 3 shots were fired, approximately 1 here, 2 here, second here, and the third about here. And the second and the third shots hit President Kennedy and killed him. He died at the hospital at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. This all was a noontime motorcade. By the way, this was the building, is the courthouse where Jack Ruby was in fact tried, but Oswald would have been tried in this very courthouse. Oswald was an employee of the school book depository. Now, what happened, unfortunately, is that Oswald was killed 2 days later. I may not do this right, so forgive me. Okay. 2 days later, on the morning, Sunday morning, many of you are old enough to have seen this yourself. Oswald was being taken from the police headquarters down to the county jail, which was that building that I said was the courthouse. It's also the county jail. And a guy stepped out of the crowd of reporters and shot and killed Oswald right there. He died within moments. That guy was Jack Ruby, who ran a strip club called the Carousel Club. And he went on to be tried and convicted for the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald. So the premise of this book is, what if at the last minute or at the last second, Ruby had been pulled aside by Roy Vaughn, Officer Roy Vaughn, who was the real officer at the time, and who was supposed to be guarding the ramp down which Ruby came. If he had stopped Ruby so that we would have had, it would have been quite easy to do, then we would have had the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. I'm almost done with my long answer, but I wound up wanting to say it wouldn't be enough just to say, here's the case for the prosecution, here's the case for the defense. I thought it had to be, that might have been a good magazine article, but I wanted to write something that would help the reader feel like they had parachuted in to 1963 and were sitting at the elbow of these lawyers and investigators as the case unfolded, and they did good work on both sides to develop their cases. I'm a legal writer, I'm not a novelist, but my daughter is, and she gave me some good advice that I took to heart, and I eventually did a credible stab at a novel that will help you feel that you parachuted in, and you're right there with Abe Summer as the main prosecutor, or Elaine Navarro, who is the assistant in the Dallas office, and they eventually get brought onto the state with the state lawyers to help try the case. On the other side is the famous Percy Foreman. He did say he wanted to represent Oswald, and but Oswald was killed before he could close the deal. So in this scenario, Percy gets the assignment, and he does a tremendous job. I think his opening statement and closing arguments in this trial are models of what I wish I could have done as a lawyer. They're really very good. And his cross-examinations, though usually short, are right to the point of what he's trying to accomplish. So that's the setup. I wanted to try to explain to the public what good lawyers do and how they try a case, so that and to help them understand the true facts of the assassination, not the BS that you see on the Discovery Channel and CNN and Fox News that have these extremely conspiratorial. No, people come forward 30 years later and say, I was on the grassy knoll. No, these are the people who are in these books, testified at the time in question, and were cross-examined at the time in question. These were people who told their story, and that's what the evidence you will learn if you pay attention to it. So it had several purposes. I wanted you to feel like you're in 1963 and all the problems we had in the country in 1963. That wanted you to see the public to see how good lawyers like you would approach this case and try this case, and what the real facts of the Kennedy assassination were. So believe me, it took 8 years to write over many early mornings and weekends, and I did it. I got really into it, and I really liked doing it, and so I'm glad now that the publisher enjoyed it enough to say they were going to put their money behind it. Okay, next question.
I'm going to give you a chance if you want to sit down and take a rest. I have so many different questions, and you all probably do too. And we're definitely going to have question and answers at the end of this show. One of my questions really is just my personal question. It doesn't say judge anywhere on the cover. It doesn't. Did you have fights with your publisher about that? Did you think about this sort of thing? Did somebody tell you to take it off? Or?
No, I did not want it to say Judge William Alsop because I didn't want it to sell for that, the main thing. But it does say on the flyleaf somewhere that I'm a judge.
It does.
So I didn't conceal that.
Although
but I did not want it to. I just felt like it would be better to just use my name.
Well, let me just say it's very modest and humble in some sense. And some people might not associate that with Judge Bill Alsop here at the courtroom.
What do you mean?
But it refers to author William Alsop. It doesn't say, it does say that he's a judge, but I think you got to get to the back cover or the back flap before you do that. There's no picture of Judge Alsop until you get to the back flap. So it's an interesting.
Can I tell the story about Bob Schieffer? Well, the first blurb on the back is by Bob Schieffer, the famous CBS a news anchor for a long time and Face the Nation. I admired him a lot, and when he retired long ago, I wrote him a nice note, and then had no idea that I would ever approach him again. But he is a character in the book because he was there, and in real life, the things he has said in this book, he did. So he is, but I didn't want to misrepresent him, so I wrote him another letter and I said, I've written this book, would you read the parts where you come up? It's because if you object, I'll just take them out. He said, let me read the whole thing. So he read the whole thing. He said, this is great. It ought to be published, and I'll do a blurb for you. So that's how he volunteered to do the blurb, and he read the whole book, and he's still continuing to help me. For example, he's opened the door to me in some places in Dallas. So next year sometime I'll go down to Dallas to help tell this story.
So I guess I want to ask you first, do you have more pictures you want to show us?
Well, we can go through them quickly, but this is the main one. Okay. Would you like for me to show the others?
No, it's up to you. This is your show.
All right, well, let's, can we go through them?
I don't know who's got the control, so here we go.
All right, wait a minute, I got to get the mic. This is a real picture of the Elm Street and the depository, and this is where the sniper's nest was on that 6th floor. And this red building, it's a long lens, so that red building is, I think, called the Daltex building, and it is it's actually behind from the cars, you can tell that this was probably in the late 60s when this photograph, I'm not sure. I see flowers here, so that might have been right after the weekend of the assassination. I'm just not sure, but, okay, next picture.
Let's go back to that one just for a second.
Sure.
So this is. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. I'll probably drop it. This is the book depository. This is the window. This is Elm Street.
Correct.
And this is where the car is. And so there's a whole discussion in the book about junk science and ballistics and what it's like to make 3 shots from here. And I thought that was very interesting.
Well, yes.
You didn't call it junk science.
I did not, but it's not, I mean, it is quite clear that it was not easy, but it was doable for one person to get off 3 shots in the time that it took the car to go from point A to point B to point C. And all of those wild conspiracy people who say, no, it could not have been done, and therefore there had to be somebody on top of the Daltex building, it's just baloney. It could have easily been done.
Okay, let's do the next.
Okay, this is, I decided not to show you the Zapruder film because it's so, even today, horrible. So, but these are 4 pieces from it. And this first picture is approximately when as they turned onto Elm Street and the first shot was fired, which, by the way, missed the car altogether. That's quite clear now. But at the time, J. Edgar Hoover said that it actually hit somebody in the car. And so that was a point of debate. And even today, people will debate that issue. But to my mind, and in the book, you'll see the evidence is quite clear that it did miss. The second picture is as President Kennedy was hit in his neck, and he's realizing he's been hit in his neck. That was the second shot. He would have survived that, most likely. And I have not shown the frame 313, which is where he was hit in the head, and it's the awful scene. But this is a moment later when the First Lady was trying to, was doing what she's shown here, and that is a Secret Service agent racing to get onto the car to protect her and get her back into the car. A moment after this, they raced off to the hospital in Dallas. So next, we have just a couple more. I didn't have many. This Oswald was arrested within an hour and a half of the assassination, and they had him at police headquarters in mid-afternoon. And that was the mug shot. This is a picture of Oswald that his wife Marina took earlier in 1963, after he had ordered and received this Italian rifle, and it had a scope on it right there. And then he also had this pistol, which I believe is the pistol that he used to kill Officer Tippit. I didn't mention Tippit before, but about an hour after the assassination of President Kennedy, Oswald was walking along the streets in Oak Cliff, a suburb, and an officer stopped him, Dallas police officer, stopped him to inquire, and Oswald shot him 4 times and killed him. Now you may say, how could there possibly be any defense for that? Well, if you accept the premise of some of the earlier testimony, which is corroborated, then it's not so wild that there could be a defense for the murder of Officer Tippit. Okay, I think there's one more. This is Percy Foreman in real life. He died decades ago, but at the time he was one of the top 5 criminal trial lawyers in America. he worked out of Houston, but he tried cases all over the United States. So I think that's it. Let's go back to the diagram right here. Leave that diagram up. Okay, next question.
So I have some specifics to ask you about the book, but I wonder how much you would like to tell the group, or how much you would like to say to what I was 7 years old or something when this happened. The emotional impact of this event was not huge on me, although I do recall that watching the funeral on television. I think most of America did. But what was the emotional impact like on you? You were a young college student at the time and idealistic, and this happened. So I think the book actually conveys, but not as well as it might, sort of the emotional impact of this.
I think anyone who was an adult at the time was devastated by it and confused, because in real life, Oswald was killed 2 days later. So we had the assassination on Friday, and we were still learning the facts about that. This, one fact here, one fact there over the national news, and also planning for the state funeral that was going to happen that Monday. And then suddenly on that Sunday morning, the assassin was himself killed. And it was hard to grasp. It was very confusing and made you feel, what is happening in our country? What will, who will be killed next? And it was easy at that moment to believe there was a wide conspiracy. That is true. Who could be in on this? That so many people could be killed, 2 people killed in such a short time. To lose the president, I think President Obama had some of the same feeling that a young dynamic leader. We haven't had too many presidents like that, but John Kennedy was like that. He had a beautiful young wife. They had 2 lovely children. They brought class, elegance to the country, and especially to Washington. And the world loved them. The world, when they went anywhere in the world, they were heroes, especially Jackie Kennedy, who could speak many languages. So to lose that in an instant, it was a crushing blow. That's, I guess, the best way I can describe it, and a confusing blow. It took some time for us to. That's why President Johnson wanted the Warren Commission. Was he wanted to help the country understand what had happened, and so that we could put our arms around it and grasp the totality of how that awful event had come to pass.
Yeah, and the Warren Commission was Earl Warren, the Chief Justice, appointed at the time a bipartisan commission, not just a congressional committee from one party, in a sense. The enormity of that we haven't seen very often either. So, and really, who else has been assassinated as a president? Lincoln we can think of, but I don't know that everybody here can name the other 2, right? Garfield and McKinley. They don't stand in our history as strongly as Jack Kennedy. And he was only president for really a short time.
1,000 days.
Let me ask you some things about the book. And this is more about writing. I don't know, a lot of lawyers are sort of people who wish they could write a book if they could only write. You wrote one. And there are moments in here as a trial lawyer when I'm thinking, I want to hear what happened at that point. And you don't put it in. So there's jury selection, nothing about jury selection. There's this weekend before a cross-examination, this is a spoiler, of Lee Harvey Oswald. And I'm sitting there thinking, just like everybody in the room might be thinking, what would I do during that weekend to be not just preparing the cross, but be preparing to be the defense attorney if I were the judge? there's not much discussion of that. And what was the other one? Jury deliberations. There's no discussion about jury deliberations, and that would have been, we won't tell you which way the jury came out. So.
Well, let's go to the first one of those on jury selection, which would have been a huge, believe it or not, I did have an entire chapter and a half. And I got rid of it because I thought it just added more pages to an already long manuscript, and I needed to find ways to shorten it. So that chapter went out, but there was, I thought, one humorous line, because jury selection in a capital case is not a funny thing, but they were asking the prospective juror one at a time whether he would be willing to impose the death penalty. So the guy says, "Well, would you pay my way to Huntsville?" Now, say you don't know what Huntsville is, where they put people to death in Texas. So he thought, see, you don't even get it. Okay. So the juror thought he was going to actually have to push the button, and he was willing to do it if they would pay his way. So, all right. Anyway, all of that went on the cutting room floor. With respect to how the cross-examiner prepared for that cross-examination, you're right. I don't have, they're just two small little insights into his, how he steeled himself for that day. One of them has to do with Roosevelt's prayer on D-Day, and something that he had carried in his pocket from the Second World War. You remember that people who would have been in these positions were former soldiers from the Second World War. But otherwise, the preparation is quite a number of steps that had taken place to get ready for, like he goes to New Orleans, and he gets the employment file. This is the lawyer, gets the employment file for Oswald from the Riley coffee company that made Louisiana coffee. You ever heard of Louisiana coffee? You're such coffee snobs out here, you probably haven't, but Louisiana was a big thing where I grew up. And so Oswald worked there, and he put some outright lies on that employment application. And that comes up in the cross-examination later on, when he's trying to show what a total liar Oswald was. So the preparation is spread out. There's not I don't show him in his hotel room putting the stacks of paper in little piles by subject, which is the way most of us would have gotten ourselves ready. No, I didn't do that. I agree, I did not do that, but I skipped that whole part. And then finally on jury deliberations, it is left to be a mystery. Although Jack Ruby tells you how it comes out. He's in the final chapter. He goes to hear the closing arguments along with one of the striptease artists, Little Lynn, who was a real person, by the way. She died in Michigan a few years ago. Little Lynn, they go to hear the closing argument. And then she's worried that they're going to electrocute the wrong man because Percy Foreman was so good. And then Jack Ruby, he says, no. And he says it was his rifle and his gun. And this is Texas. And basically, it's as simple as that. His rifle, his gun, this is Texas. Now, you have to read the epilogue to see how the jury came out. It's inferred. You can figure it out from the epilogue that how the jury came out. But you're right. There's nothing in there about the jury. This is not 12 Angry Men. No, it's a different. This is not about the jury. This is about lawyers.
Okay, and so the other thing that was implied in a G-rated way is romance. but you didn't write too much about romance. And by the way, this is not a criticism, because a book that knows what to cut out is better than a book that doesn't. But what about the romance?
Well, I had, okay, there were some chapters that got thrown out. And I just decided that I was better at writing other things than trying to write about romance. So there are some hints of potential romance. Let's put it even more limited than that. But there is no scene where there's anything that would even approach a modern day movie type romance. So,
and so here's a more sort of hometown baseball kind of question. And I haven't previewed these questions with the judge much. So there's a fair amount of federal law enforcement, prosecutors coming down versus state prosecutors. And I thought that was actually very interesting, this balance, especially for the Federal Bar Association, this balance between the federal prosecutors and the state prosecutors. What's your take on that? And by that, I mean, you want to tell us about what's your take about it in the book, or in general, where does that come from?
Well, I mean, I have known this for a long time. All of you know this. The local police and the state police resent federal lawyers and the FBI. You've seen it in a million movies, sweeping in to tell you how to run their case, right? No, they don't like that. And the federal people always think they know best. The feds think they have the best and highest standards, so they, can do it better. And the state people resent that attitude. And they should resent that attitude. So this is a little piece of the story. In the early scenes, Bobby Kennedy sends our protagonist to Dallas, a federal prosecutor from Main Justice, to be his eyes and ears. There's no idea that he's going to ever get involved in the trial, but there are a lot of federal pieces to this case, And so it makes sense to have a federal lawyer down there to help the state prosecute the case. The DA was the famous Henry Wade. He was the Wade of Roe v. Wade, by the way. Nobody seems to ever remember that, but he had almost never lost a single case. Almost everybody he prosecuted went to the death penalty. He was a very good lawyer, and so he's the state, and so the feds show up. But there is a dynamic that goes on. It's over several chapters where you will see that the prosecutors realize, and the judge realizes, that it would be a big help to put them in as trial counsel as well as the state prosecutors in, so that you'd have an enlarged team. You'd have Henry Wade and his prosecutor, Bill Alexander, who are real people, by the way, with the two fictional people, the guy from Main Justice and the young prosecutor from the Dallas federal office.
The young, attractive female prosecutor.
Well, I think you read that into it. Maybe I said that.
I did. Do you see the movie when you write this book? Do you see a movie?
Do I see? It would be a good movie, but I know enough of the real world. There's no way that's ever going to happen. The federal people wind up being part of the trial team, and in the process of doing it, they're all good with it. There's no resentment, because the Henry Wade comes to trust the judgment of these two federal prosecutors, and he actually wants them on the team. And so that's the reason they wind up getting onto the trial team. So that it goes from being eyes and ears of Bobby Kennedy to being on the trial team.
So I actually think we've said enough so that there's a lot of questions out there. So we'll just go a couple more minutes, but here's one that allows me to reveal something about you that you probably haven't talked about much with everybody in the room, maybe some people. So you clerked for Justice William O. Douglas in 1971, I think, right out of law school. would Justice Douglas have liked this book? Based on what you know is one question. And then, and the other question is, do you want to tell us anything about what it was like to clerk for Justice Douglas? Because I find that most people want to, you don't know that many people who clerk for Supreme Court justice, and they say, well, what was it like? But would he have liked this book? Would he have been able to read it?
I think he would have liked it because it is an honest treatment of the subject that has been so misconstrued in the popular press and popular media that he would have appreciated that, the fairness of going back to the original evidence. And I think he would have thought it was an okay story. I don't know if he would have put it on his list of best, but I think he would have said okay.
All right, this is the last softball, and then maybe we'll take some questions. But I really wonder this. Was it fun to write the book, or was it painful to write the book?
No, it was a lot of fun. There were I got into these characters and the story, and I felt like I myself was actually, I had parachuted in to 1963. I felt like I was there, and even though some of these people were fictional, I felt like I knew them as well as I knew anybody. And, after several years of figuring out how they would have reacted in certain circumstances, so I felt it was a great experience. Now, I will say this, I didn't think I would ever get it published, and my first effort failed. But then the people who did that memoir that I wrote got interested in it. They had not been approached because they did not do fiction, and this is the first fiction book they ever did. So they liked the book, and so that then my spirits went up when they said that they would like to publish it.
If you haven't read his book, I've got the full title here because the full title is somewhat revealing. I have it if I can find it.
It's called One Over. Is that what
It's
you're?
called One Over, Reflections of a Federal Judge on His Journey from Jim Crow, Mississippi.
Right. They published that. That's New South Books in Alabama, and they decided to take a chance on this Oswald book.
Well, I think that's a great book to read as well. Should we take some questions?
Sure.
Now, are we recording this? Do you want me to run around with a mic? Just repeat the question.
All right.
Do you have any insight on what Oswald's hatred of Kennedy was, what motivated him?
What was Oswald's hatred of Kennedy? What motivated him?
Yes, I do. Now, do you mean in the novel or do you mean in real life?
I was thinking real life.
All right. I have an idea, but it's hard to be anything more than an idea. Oswald's hero was Castro. His alias was Alec. I'm talking about Oswald's alias, was Alec Hidell, Hidell, as in rhymes with Fidel. And he used that to buy the guns, that alias. Now, at that time, the Kennedy administration was trying to kill Castro, and it was well known. There were newspaper stories in Dallas, as well as he used words like "get rid of," or the people of Cuba should get rid of Castro. And the Kennedy administration had used even the mob to try to send poisonous things to Castro to kill him, all of which failed. I believe that Oswald knew all of that because it was publicly known, and that motivated him to try to kill the president, which he thought would then give him a ticket to Cuba. That's wild speculation on my part, but it's informed speculation.
And it's true, I think, that he had training as a rifle.
Yeah, he was in the Marines. He tested once. This is Oswald. He tested once as marksman and once as sharpshooter, but never at the highest level, which I've forgotten the name of, maybe expert. There you go. John would know. He not expert, but the other two levels.
Great.
And the next question.
Let's take this young lady here and then this young man.
All right.
Did you visit any of the locations, or did you write this all based on?
I never went to Dallas.
The question
Oh, yeah.
is, did you visit these locations, or was it all based on reading?
Yes and no, yes and no. Once I started writing it, I did not go to this scene right here because I thought I understood it well enough. But I did go to New Orleans and went to the library that Oswald went to and went to his house, which at the time when I went, it was still a ramshackle place, and it looked like exactly the way it probably did when he lived there in 1963. It has since become a spiffed up lawyer's office. But in around 2015, when I took that visit, it was still a derelict. So those are the, New Orleans and Dallas are the only two places that, there's an opening scene is in Washington, but other than that, it's all in Dallas. So.
And the judge spent 2.5 years working in Washington, maybe 3.
Well, at the where Abe Summer was located, but none of the scenes really take place at Main Justice, but I did work there for 2 years in the Justice Department at Main Justice back in the 70s. Next question.
Your Honor, I was curious if you read the Stephen King book, the counterfactual book 112363, and your thoughts about it. I'm interested in what this.
Okay.
So the question is, have you read Stephen King's counterfactual history called, what is it?
It's 112363.
112363, which I never heard of until this moment.
The answer is half of it. And it is a very long, but very interesting. It's based on the idea that this guy, I think he's in Rhode Island or somewhere, and he goes through a hole in the fence in modern times, and down this little alleyway, and he winds up in 1963, actually 1962, and he gets to Dallas. And the question is, can he interdict the course of events that led to the Kennedy assassination? And I think I'm up to about the summer of 1963. But I stopped reading that a long time ago. I got busy on other things, but it is a tremendous story, yes.
It's worth finishing, too.
I will, thank you, I will do that.
Okay. All the way in the back, I see a hand. Speak loudly.
If you had a choice, would you have preferred to prosecute Oswald or defend him?
If you had a choice, would you have preferred to prosecute Oswald or defend him?
Well, the federal public defenders here will be out of my case if I say prosecute. I will say this much, it was an easier case to prosecute than to defend, as is probably always true in our courthouse. But these, the evidence was overwhelming against Oswald.
But the defense was pretty good.
The defense is maybe enough to raise reasonable doubt. So it's all corroborated right here in these books. It's amazing to me that no one has seen this line of defense over all these years, but they haven't. And so there you go.
If you read the book, I'll give you this advice. There's an author's note at the end that talks about what's real and what's fiction. Don't read that if you want to just enjoy it as a novelistic account. If you want to sort of go through the book knowing sort of where the twists and turns might be, you could read that. That's in there. Why did you include the author's note?
I tell you one of the reasons. Once I read a historical novel by Gore Vidal called Lincoln, and it was kind of a model for what I want to do, although I never would pretend to compare myself to Gore Vidal, but it was a tremendous book. Anyway, at the end, he has an author's note to readers, and it describes the extent to which everything in there was true. For example, he said, every person, including Lincoln, was at the time and place where he placed them in the novel. He invented the conversation, of course, but the people were there. He said there was one exception, and that was he had General McClellan at the wedding of Kate Chase in the summer of 1863, and he was actually not at the wedding. He had typhoid fever at the time, but he admitted that. He said for literary license, he decided he would have McClellan at the wedding. And I thought that was such an interesting way to help the reader realize how much of the story was true. And that's what I was trying to get across in my author's note to readers, how authentic most of, and then I say, well, here are the things that are fictional. So please remember, this is not a history, this is fiction, but here are the parts that are actually verifiable, so, yeah.
And that's even true of the dialogue, right? Some of the dialogue is your invented dialogue. Some of it is actual testimony from.
Oh, yes, most of the testimony is taken from these volumes, but I streamlined it a little bit. Every now and then there would be, you know, how lawyers are, there would be too many questions and you could get it down to one question and one answer. All right. So I would, that's what I did. But it did not compromise the, the essence of it.
Made it better.
Made it better.
Okay, here's another question, and then I'll look over there. Yeah, sorry.
Your Honor, if there had been a trial, do you think that would have helped with the grieving process and processing the loss in America?
Yes.
The question is, would it have helped if there had been a trial? Would it have helped with the grieving process in America?
Why do you think that?
Well, it would have helped. We still would have lost President Kennedy, but we would have better understood why. Now, the Warren Commission did a good job, in my opinion, of helping us understand that, and that helped with the grieving process too. But if there had been a trial, it's the American way. We have two sides. We have a judge up there. Both sides get to have their say and ask their questions and present their evidence, and the people get to follow that. The press would have followed it. The public would have followed it, but instead we wound up not having that opportunity, and we have to resort to speculations. So I do think a trial it helps. Nothing would have brought President Kennedy back, so that in that sense, no, it would not have helped. But I think in terms of moving on, it would have helped.
There's a little parallel maybe to the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building in 1995, was it? And Timothy McVeigh, you remember there was immediately speculation there was a big conspiracy, and the bulletins went out, searched for all the Arab American looking people, and then they discovered Timothy McVeigh was a sole operator and a white supremacist, and had a whole trial. Merrick Garland was the prosecutor in that case, our current Attorney General, and I think it helped people believe that the facts were as they were laid out because it was tested in the system with some good defense attorneys. So maybe that's a parallel. Let me get this question and then come back to you.
So I was just wondering, you spoke about your process of how you came to write this book and how you were interested. And I'm curious about one of your previous books, Missing in the Minarets. And I was curious how you came to write about that book and the person that that's based on.
So Judge Alsop writes books all the time. This is called Missing in the Minarets. It's mentioned in the beginning of the book. It just says, here's a list of other books. So the question is, what got you to write about that topic?
All right, Missing in the Minarets is about the search for Pete Starr in 1933. He was a lawyer in San Francisco, but a prolific mountaineer. He went missing in the High Sierra. And this is about the search that was organized that involved the famous Norman Clyde and two other young Jules Eichhorn, who was Judge Chesney's music teacher in Burlingame High, and a guy named Glenn Dawson of the famous Dawson Books in L.A. Anyway, it's about that. It's about that, and this is all true. It's not a novel. It's all, and I researched it. I came up with a lot of I was going to just do a magazine article until I found a treasure trove of material never before discovered. This was when I was a lawyer. I started this in the 90s, and it came out about 98 or 99, just before I got this job. So it was a different it wasn't a novel, so it was trying to lay out the facts, but in a mystery way. And it is presented as a mystery of where could Pete Starr have gone. So what was the question again?
I was wondering how you came to be interested in writing.
Well, I'm a mountaineer of sorts. I've done a lot of climbing and mountaineering myself, and it's age 77, not much anymore, but back in the day, I was pretty good. And I knew that the Pete Starr story existed, but it was not very much published on it. And when I realized how little had been published on it, again, just to edify my own edification, I went to the Sierra Club Library, and I hung out there for a while and read what was available, and then did some research and eventually hit this treasure trove. And I said, somebody should write a book about this. This is pretty good stuff. And so I decided to do it. I'll give you just one sentence. I found the original roll of film that Pete had in his camera in his fatal trip. And I printed those pictures in my own darkroom, which had not been printed since 1933. And here I am in the 90s printing pictures from the guy's last roll of film. It was a good story. It's a good story, but yeah.
And have you been to that? You've been to the location?
Well, I've been there. Oh yeah, I've been to that location many times, but I had not climbed the peak on which he was killed.
Probably a good idea. There we go.
What was the reaction of other students when you were going to school in 1963 to the assassination?
Yes, I get it, yeah.
What was the reaction of other students when
Yeah.
he was in college in
Yeah,
1963?
this is one of the most disturbing memories that I have. I was in the commons area of our dorm, and the dorm mom came out, and we watched the TV for a moment because she was just dazed. They said the president has been shot. And sure enough, it eventually, after about 30 minutes of watching it, that's what Walter Cronkite said. Remember the famous, when Walter in New York takes his glasses off and says it's I think it was 23 p.m. Dallas time, President Kennedy was pronounced dead. It was to me shocking. And I was heartsick, and so was my dorm mother. But I walked out. I heard this noise outside. I walked out, and this was Mississippi State. Remember this. And they were running around in random, ringing cowbells, which is what you do at Mississippi State when a touchdown is scored. And they were celebrating the death of President Kennedy. And that wasn't just one or two. It was probably at least a dozen students doing that. It was, even for somebody, if they hated him, still you got to respect the president. And yet that's how much he was hated by a lot of people in Mississippi at the time. So I'm sorry to say it was not a good memory.
There's discussion in your book a little bit, I mean, to go to this sensitive topic of some racism in the courtroom process, let's just say, and also the young, I say attractive, federal prosecutor is Latino, and there's a little discussion of that.
Those are two different things. There is racism this was before the Civil Rights Act of '64. Segregation was legal in every state, really, unless state law made it illegal. And so a situation comes up in the trial. One of the most important witnesses is Amos Ewins. He's a real guy. His testimony is in these books behind me. He was a 16-year-old kid at a local high school, and he was there, and he saw the final shot fired. And he becomes an important witness for Percy Foreman. He's African American. And Percy is worried in the book that Mrs. Ewens is going to want to attend. And now the judge they had all decided they had to desegregate the courthouse because so many press people were coming from all over the world. So they had taken down the colored signs for the bathrooms and the water fountains, and they had, and the courtroom gallery was open to anyone. But Percy Foreman, as the defense lawyer, is worried that the jury, if Amos Ewens is on the stand and his mother is in the courtroom sitting, say, with the defense people, that the jury will resent it. So he has to struggle, and so does his young assistant, who is someone else. That's someone named Karen that you're thinking of, and so they have to they have a big fight about this. She won't do what he wants him to do, and then there is a moment of truth when Percy Foreman decides that she's right. So, but that comes later, and that's I think a realistic trial lawyer decision that someone in that circumstance would have had to have made, and they wrestle with it. And I won't tell you what decision they make, but it's one that they carefully considered.
And I don't remember if this is in the book or not, but I have an image that the jury is all white.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, in that era
I don't know
in
if
Dallas,
it says that. All right.
in that, I think it does say that. It is all white. In that era, the juries came from the voter rolls, and the voter rolls were all white in Dallas County, maybe not other places. They would have been Hispanic. The Hispanic voters would have been in the mix, but African American voters would very likely have been almost none. So and that was true throughout the South and in Texas at that time.
And I think there is discussion. I don't know which character. There's a woman whose last name is a Latino woman, and they talk about her father was killed.
Yes, yeah, that's the assistant prosecutor.
Right.
That's Elaine Navarro.
Yeah.
Whose ancestry goes back to the Texas Declaration of Independence. The word is Tejano. Tejano is a type of not Mexican, definitely not, of Texan who was there. The roots go back to independence. And the Texas Declaration of Independence is signed by a lot of Hispanics. Navarro was one of the names on that important document. Anyway, her family dates back to that. Comes up in another point in the story.
The point is that the book doesn't shy away from some topics that are important today, I think.
That's true. Yeah. It's true, but it views those issues, not through the lens that we have today, but through the lenses that the people back then would have. But in this thing, again, go back to the young woman who's straight out of University of Texas who's helping Percy Foreman as his assistant. She's got views that are more like what we would think today. But Percy knows he's more old school. And so they have a conflict there that is pretty heated at times.
I think maybe one more question, maybe two. Anybody? We got time. You don't get the author again. Soon he'll be on the Oscars stage. We got two questions, one all the way in the back and one here. Is that all right?
What's going to be your next book?
What's going to be your next book is the question.
I'm 77, and it took 8 years to do this one. So let's see, that would be a long time. I don't think I have another. I can't think. I'll tell you, there is one I would think somebody in this room could write, and I wouldn't mind writing it myself. It's a totally different idea. It's called Congress at its best. We all know it at its worst, but if you go back and study the history of our Congress, there are some remarkably good moments there that deserve to be told. Congress at its best, and I would like to write that someday, but I haven't started, and I doubt that I could. I don't know. You know, at my age, it may not be in the cards, Candace.
But you can sign up for a master class with the judge. Yeah, Jim.
Teaching First Amendment law, we often ask ourselves, could Lee Harvey Oswald have gotten a fair trial in light of pretrial publicity? What do you think?
Could Lee Harvey Oswald have gotten a fair trial in light of pretrial publicity?
All right, I'm going to give you the answer in the book. In the book, there's a motion to change venue. Now, by the way, in the Jack Ruby case, there was also a motion, and it was denied by Judge Brown, who's the same judge in our case here. And that was a very controversial thing. So maybe they should have granted that motion in the Ruby case. But the same motion is made by the lawyers in our case, the Oswald case. But it gets traded off. Brady had come down in May of '63. So it was a brand new decision. And the lawyers make a deal. The government will turn over, meaning the prosecutors will turn over all the interviews for anyone having anything to do with Dealey Plaza and the assassination in exchange for two things. One, that would satisfy Brady. Percy Foreman agrees to that. Second, that he will withdraw his motion for change of venue. Henry Wade says that'll make it a fair trade. And Percy goes along with that. Now that's what allows Lee Harvey Oswald to see what's in here and to construct a story, if he is so inclined, that would maximize the curiosities and unanswered questions that come out of, and there are genuine questions to this day have never been answered. So I feel like Lee Harvey Oswald, who's sitting in jail on the 6th floor of that building over there, has plenty of time to read that material and to construct a story. And it's a good story that's consistent with all known facts.
So here's my only critique of the book. The idea that the Department of Justice was so concerned about Brady that they would have thought it was a trading point struck me as unrealistic in 1963, but that's just I wasn't alive then. You get the last word, Judge, and then we're going to take our reception. So it could be just goodbye, or you could say more.
Well, I want to thank you for your show of support for this project. Honestly, I never thought this many people would take this kind of interest, and it means a lot to me to see you all here. So I thank you for that, and with that, I have already signed today and yesterday a lot of the copies, but if you want it inscribed, I'm happy to do that too. I just will follow my orders on where I'm supposed to sit for that. And then in addition, there's a great reception planned, right? Why don't I turn it over to you? Why don't you come up here and explain our next few steps?
And where the reception is it right outside?
The reception will be just down the hall, right when you come out of the elevator, where the billboards and on the way to the murals. And then if people would like a personal inscription, if you could just meet the judge just right outside where the books were handed to you when you checked in, that would be great.
Good.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.